Now, Mr. President, 16 years ago, President George W. Bush announced that tariffs would be imposed on steel imports from several countries. The goal was to help protect the domestic steel industry. It was a good goal by a well-intentioned president who I supported, but it backfired. Last week, President Trump announced that he intends to impose new tariffs on imports of steel and aluminum for the same reasons. It's a good goal by a well-intentioned president, but I'm afraid it will backfire, just like it did for President Bush 16 years ago. Here is the problem, Mr. President. Tariffs are big taxes, and they're big taxes that raise consumer prices. Now, these new tariffs may save, temporarily, a few jobs in plants that produce steel and produce aluminum, but they will destroy many more jobs in auto plants that use steel and aluminum. This is especially bad news for Tennesseans, because 1/3 of our state's manufacturing jobs are auto jobs, with more than 900 plants in 87 of our 95 counties. So anything that threatens to destroy or damage auto jobs is of grave concern to Tennesseans. It will now be cheaper for some Tennessee auto parts suppliers to move outside the United States to buy steel and aluminum there and then ship finished parts back to this country. Now, these new tariffs will hurt more than U.S. auto manufacturing. The President indicated this morning that a final decision hasn't been made. I hope that before he makes a final decision, he will take into consideration the choices that companies such as Electrolux are making, which demonstrate that broad tariffs are bad for American workers and will cost Americans jobs, not just auto jobs. Here's one example of the damage the proposed steel tariff would do in Tennessee to a home appliance manufacturer who uses 100% American steel. Immediately after the tariff was announced last week, Electrolux, Europe's largest home appliance manufacturer, announced that it was putting on hold a $250 million expansion in Springfield, Tennessee, just outside Nashville. Electrolux has made multiple investments in Tennessee, with plants in Memphis as well as Springfield. Electrolux employs more than 1,000 Tennesseans. The company said, quote, "Unfortunately, this decision, the tariff decision, gives foreign appliance manufacturers a cost advantage that's hard to compete against," unquote. Note that Electrolux said it gives foreign manufacturers an advantage. Electrolux buys all of the carbon steel it uses in its Tennessee plants from American steel mills. Let me say that again. Electrolux, which employs 1,000 people in Tennessee making home appliances, buys all of its carbon steel it uses in Tennessee plants from American steel mills. Yet it's put its expansion on hold because it believes the tariff will make it hard for Tennessee plants to compete with plants overseas. Why? Because the new tariff is expected to raise American steel mills, the new tariff is expected to cause American steel mills to raise their prices to match the newer higher price of imported steel. The result of the tariff, therefore, will be higher costs for Electrolux and fewer jobs in Springfield, Tennessee, making home appliances with 100% American steel. Instead, there will be more jobs overseas making home appliances with 100% foreign steel. The new U.S. tariffs on imported steel will have raised the price of all steel sold in our country. So appliance manufacturers with plants here in the United States will have a hard time competing with plants outside of our country. We should learn the lesson from 2002, when President Bush imposed similar tariffs. Again, a good goal, a well-intentioned president, but it backfired. According to one widely cited independent study, the tariffs raised consumer prices and, quote, more American workers lost their jobs in 2002 to higher steel prices than the total number employed by the U.S. steel industry itself, unquote. President Bush's tariffs also led to retaliation as other countries threatened to impose new tariffs on American imports, which would have cost even more U.S. jobs. On Friday, the Wall Street Journal editorial board reminded readers this, and I quote, steel-using industries in the United States employ some 6.5 million Americans, while steel makers employ about 140,000 Americans. 6.5 million Americans work in companies that use steel. 140,000 Americans work in companies that make steel. Transportation industries, including aircraft and autos, account for about 40% of domestic steel consumption, followed by packaging with 20% and building construction with 15%. All will have to pay higher prices, making them less competitive globally and in the U.S., unquote. That was the Wall Street Journal. The backlash to the 2002 tariffs was so strong that President Bush terminated them early. I want to give President Trump, credit for listening. He's invited a number of us who disagree with his advisors on trade to the White House. He's listened carefully. So far, we haven't persuaded him. I hope that we still can. I thank him for listening. I hope he will continue to listen. It is unusual to have a lesson in American history so much like the action that he is proposing to take that was not good for the country, no matter how well-intentioned the president is or how good an idea it seems. Mr. President, I ask consent to include in the record a copy of the Wall Street Journal's March 2nd editorial on tariffs. And since history can often serve as a guide, I ask consent to include in the record two addresses I delivered on the U.S. Senate floor in 2003, summarizing the disastrous effect President Bush's proposed steel tariffs had on U.S. jobs.
Without objection.
Thank the President. I yield the floor.